Hello, welcome back. We're in Algebra 2, Chapter 6, Section 3. This is page 3, the last page of the notes for this section. On this checkpoint, it's oddly numbered. They call it number 1, but then they have 4 parts to it, and there's no number 2. I don't understand. Part A says you have to add the functions, so I can do that, and hopefully you can too. So, Part A. Here we go. Right? F plus g, and I'm going to write it just a little bit different. F plus g of x. You don't have to write it like that if you don't want to. It's 5x to the 3 halves, because that's what f is, plus negative 2x to the 3 halves, and that's because that's what g is. And so they have like terms. So it's really, 5 plus negative 2 times x to the 3 halves. So it's 3x to the 3 halves. Because 5 plus negative 2 is 3. And so, that's it. That's your answer for A. For part B, part B, where you're supposed to kind of subtract the functions, well, let's do that. It's not really any more exciting than part A was. It's f minus g of x. So it's 5x to the 3 halves minus negative 2x to the 3 halves. And so, again, if you want to make it extra exciting, you can factor out the coefficients, noticing that they're like terms, and you end up with 7x to the 3 halves. And that's, it's an answer. It's also the right answer, which is good. Part C, f times g. Well, this is pretty much going to follow the pattern from before. F times g of x is 5x to the 3 halves times negative 2x to the 3 halves. And with this multiplying business, I put a dot there. It might be clearer if you just put them in parentheses. It doesn't really matter as long as you know what's going on. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. And then the exponents add, so I'm going to make this look as long as possible. You are not required to make it look this long, but I'm showing you that the exponents add. You have negative 10 x to the 3 halves plus 3 halves is third. So negative 10x to the third. And there's your answer for C. D is this question about dividing, or this quotient function, f divided by g of x. So let's do that. F divided by g of x, you end up with 5x to the 3 halves divided by negative 2x to the 3 halves. And so, 5 divided by negative 2 is, it's negative 5 halves. That's just the coefficients. And then if you want to make it look long, you take the x's and you subtract the exponents. And that's negative 5 halves x to the 0. But then, of course, nobody writes the x powers of 0. So if you want to look like you know what you're doing, you write negative 5 halves alone. I guess if you wrote x to the 0, the one above the boxed answer, you'd be right too, but, probably would be less proud of yourself, etc. Okay, so then part E asks for the domains. And before you can answer that for any of these, you need to go back to the original things and think about the domains. So there's not a lot of room here. I'm going to write over on the left what the original domains are. So domains, not for our answers, but for the original f. So for the original f, which is x to the 3 halves, remember that was something with a square root in it because of the over 2. That's a square root. So that means the numbers have to be greater than or equal to 0. For g, it's pretty much the same thing. It's the same exponent. That's what's affecting the domain. So it's also x is greater than or equal to 0. Now that's important because when we go to part A to do the domains, I'm going to put the domains all together over here on the right, just kind of to try to make it somewhat organized. So for part A, you need the domains of each of f and g, and they're each x is greater than or equal to 0. So together your answer is x is greater than or equal to 0. Boom. For part B, where you were subtracting them, that's the same. X is greater than or equal to 0. And pro tip, the answers to domains for adding and subtracting, they're always going to be the same as each other. For part C, it's also x is greater than or equal to 0. So perhaps, excuse me, that was in the wrong color. It's embarrassing. I've been told some of you take glee in my errors, and I can only hoping they're moderately amusing. But x is greater than or equal to 0 for C. Super pro tip, or perhaps all pro tip, it's the same for adding, subtracting, and multiplying. Now D is different. Because you're dividing, and because g of 0 equals 0, you're not allowed to have that denominator be 0, so that means that the number 0 is bad. G of 0 is 0. There's nothing you can do about it. But you don't want the number that divides by 0. So the domain answer is x is greater than 0. It's the same answer as all the others, but you want to exclude the one that makes the denominator 0. So I boxed that answer to clarify it from the line above, so I should probably box the others. And this is the answer to the checkpoint, and this is the end of page 3. This is the end of section 3. Thanks for watching.